Manage your temperament and emotions. Respond and not react. That's the difference between the emotional and logical piece, right? So best practice suggestions. I bring this up because a lot of people do this wrong. Technology is a blessing and a curse, right? And I heard Nina say earlier, you guys are kind of scattered. Know when it's appropriate to use technology as a means of offering feedback, which is usually never. It's usually never. Email versus in person. When I do an email versus in person discernment, it is related to the type of feedback I'm given. If I'm just saying to the person, hey, can we pay a little bit more attention to when your reports are come in? I kind of need it by this date. That's okay. But if you're like, hey, we had a situation with this case, and then can you tell me a little bit more about what happened? No. The reason for that is, anybody misread an email before? Based on your own personal interpretation, and you might have been way off. So emails are subjective, and that's also not a good place to house like critical feedback, unless you're maybe recapping a dialogue you had with another person, because that does act as documentation. I always like to throw that in. It does create sort of a timeline if it's needed. If it's not needed, don't do it. But even still, that does not mean you have primary communication via email. That means you have this in-person contact, and then I respond back and say, okay, Nina, thanks for meeting with me today. Just as a point of reference, we discussed this and this, and then we rehash it, but we don't start there. Does that make sense? Pay attention. If somebody comes in to speak with you about anything, you're not on your phone, you're not with your back to them on your computer, look at the person, be invested in what they're saying, and also say to them, look, I've got 10 minutes, you've got my full attention for 10 minutes, and then I got to get back to this one big thing. So if we need longer than that, maybe we want to set something else up. Third-party appropriateness. If it's a third-party involvement, if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, it should not be with that person and another peer. It should be with that person and an upline. We don't do community or group sessions to offer feedback. Why would I not do that? How is the other person going to feel? Yeah, wouldn't you? We're running 2 against 1? No, we're doing man-to-man defense in the not zone. Unless we need the supervisor to witness. That has occurred in my job. I've had to do that with a supervisor before, because I'm like, I'm not talking to her by myself, because she had a tendency, I watched her with other people do the he said, she said thing, and then she did the tears too, and I'm like, no. We need a supervisor. Flag on the flag, nope. Anybody else have a general rule for feedback, conflict management?
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I do the 24 to 48 hour rule and the emotional de-escalation. Here's why. If I have a conversation with you a week post-incident, do you remember what I'm talking about? No. I mean, I barely remember what I did yesterday. Mondays are terrible days. So I'm not gonna,
I'm sorry, I was just gonna add when you were done.
No, you add.
Okay,
I need water.
I was just gonna add that there's a lot of research that shows that you have to receive 5 pieces of positive feedback to balance 1 negative feedback.
Yeah. Does that make sense to everybody? Not to mention, you're running your own internal critique of yourself on a daily basis. So you have to combat not only your internal dialogue, but other bits of feedback. So that makes sense. And if you do, to your point, sir, if you see somebody doing a great job, or they've done something really great, say that to them. That is a great feeling to have somebody notice you. We picked thankless careers. Can we all agree with that? We picked a very difficult job, so there's not a ton of things associated with it. So if you see it, say it. That builds morale, and that builds a team environment that we all should strive for. Know how you're talking to someone. Again, this is a content versus delivery piece. I've gotten this feedback before. My tone, I think he's using it as a distraction, though, to avoid hearing what I'm saying, which is not technically my fault, right? Know your tone, know how you're speaking, because when you are in your feelings about something, we have a tendency to speak in a way that's distracting. or unkind. I mean, just frankly, it's unkind. Body language. I throw this in there. Take this with a grain of salt. Like how you're standing, how you're sitting can speak to how you're receiving feedback. Mm-hmm.
I just read this article, it talked about communication, and it
Yeah.
said that body language was like 57% of communication.
Yeah.
Tone was another 37%, and only 7% were the spoken words.
Yeah, truly. Because we display how we're receiving or offering. How to finish your delivery. Be mindful of your body language, avoid an aggressive posture. Look at someone. I have a coworker who, when she gives critical feedback, because she gets a little nervous, I laugh. I was told the story if she was here. But she'll give somebody feedback, and then she kind of does this laugh thing at the end, like a nervous laugh, you know? And I'm like, you just poked a hole in, like, you just kind of negate it. You laughed after you get feedback. You can't keep doing that. So I make fun of her about it now because she's gotten better. That was years ago. But know your delivery. Make sure they understand what they're hearing, okay? Allow them an opportunity to ask a question. So some other tips, and they're all within your program. I have a couple scenarios I want to run through just to give some practical real-life examples. But as we look at these, make sure you're listening, not judging, reflect, ask questions if necessary. Saying I understand, even if you can't change it, saying you understand it, helps somebody feel validated. Don't act defensively. Don't return anger with anger. This is challenging, especially if you feel like you are being disrespected. And don't argue. If it moves to an argument, pull the plug, right? At that moment, we can revisit this. I think you and I both need to just take a couple of minutes and let's revisit this. We'll set up a time to meet later this week. Saying I'm sorry is huge. Setting limits and boundaries. Taking care of yourself. Folks, we can't take things personally. This is something that we all have to actively combat because things do feel personally, but you can't take it personally because, as I mentioned, people are interacting and behaving a certain way because it is purposeful to them. It has nothing to do with you. Their behaviors are purposeful to them, and the same ours are to us. Don't take it personally. Self-care, stop overthinking. Look at what you have control over. You have control over yourself and what? Your reaction. Your reaction. That's it. Know your strengths. Exercise or get some form of physical activity regularly. Forgive others and allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. But know that's what you're doing and then give yourself time to come down from that. Don't wait until you are so far into your stress state. So as an example, a lot of people come into my office and say, Jesse, I'm really stressed. Cool, I can do stress. That's no problem. I'm actually pretty good at stress management stuff if you ask me. Why are you stressed? I don't know. It tells me two things. One, it's cumulative and it's ongoing. If you don't have self-care techniques in place prior to that conversation, I'm going to create a mountain in your world because I'm going to ask you to start to do them. If you don't already have them and practice them at least on a consistent basis, me putting that on your plate when you're already stressed out is going to feel huge and not in a good way. I'll make a solid business case for it in my office, but it's going to feel like one more mountain you have to overcome. So be intentional. Even if you're not doing something every day, have a fallback, have a resource for when I am stressed, I do this. I'd like to highlight that I'm proposing to you a healthy stress management technique, because people take that in different directions depending on my environment. So just be mindful of that as well.
Hey Jesse, we do have till 11, so you don't have to rush by any means, just so you know.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
So what if, and I'm going to toss this out to the group, because I'm sure we've all had experiences at other jobs or wherever, your conflict is with your supervisor. That adds a layer to it, right? For all of us. So some scenarios. I'll read this because it's probably very small in area. You have been a supervisor for quite some time now, and you have mentioned to your manager that you would like to grow in your managerial skills. Since you began stepping it up a notch in hopes of earning a shot at the upcoming opening, you learn that your manager seems to be taking the credit for your work you've done. You are starting to feel bullied and left out of the loop. You wonder if you're being overly sensitive, but feel like you should suck it up rather than stir the pot and risk not being considered for the new job. Unfortunately, it is affecting you negatively. How do you address this? After all the new information you have, how do you address this?
Take a minute to process.
Emotional de-escalation, yes. Now what? Confront.
One-to-one or whatever, so they can discuss it, because otherwise if you discuss it, that fails, you're just creating a bigger problem.
So she says confront it, because if we're discussing with other people, we're creating a bigger problem. Can we all agree that we're gonna move into confrontation stage? Yes. How are we gonna do this with a supervisor?
Give yourself time to plan what you want to say first.
Yes. I encourage folks, this is gonna tap into your emotions. This particular one is gonna tap into your emotions because you're gonna feel like you are not a valued person. Fair? What people need to do in a situation like this is extend a courtesy email and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about some things that have kind of been on my mind lately. Wondering if I can set up a time to come in and chat with you. Don't do a fly by the office. That, under the assumption that this person is going to be busy and they're not going to be able to fully engage with you at this time. Plus, if you have an appointment set up, you can prepare, you have a timeline. It's not just, oh, well, I'm upset, I'm going to go in and have a conversation. It's thoughtful interaction. I encourage people, after the meeting has been set up, because of course the supervisor is going to say, absolutely, let's talk. Make yourself a list of key points that you want to go over. Why? Because you're going to be in an emotional place because this feels personal to you. The more personal it feels, the more emotional you're going to feel about it. That's just the nature of the beast, right? Give yourself some talking points, because what you don't want to have happen is you're going to leave the room and be like, seriously, I forgot to talk about this and this. You know what I'm saying? We've all done that. Give yourself some talking points. Go in there and ask a question. Make your statement. I kind of feel like, you know, I've been trying really hard and I'm noticing that this is occurring and I'm just kind of wondering, am I misreading this or what's this about? This is my intention, and ask a question. Because if you go in there and you tell them, if I come into your office and I tell you what you're doing, are you going to be like, oh, absolutely, you're so right? You're going to be like, what'd you just say? We're going to go. So your approach is important. Be thoughtful in your approach so your content can shine through that. Does that make sense? Anybody have any other suggestions? And obviously, of course, because of the way you've approached this, this person's going to be in total agreement with you and then you'll get the promotion. Or at least I hope so. Anybody have any other thoughts on this one?
I find that sometimes I struggle if I have a specific issue with coming up with examples when I'm trying to have a conversation. So for my own self, I try to, like, this day, this incident, this, so that I can very clearly give them an idea of the things that happened that impacted me.
Yes, so you can definitely have some specific examples. I encourage folks to do that. Be mindful, though. There's a fine line, and then you're like, what's the fine line? Well, the fine line is that sometimes if we have examples or like date and time, chapters and verses, that person is going to feel like we've been running a tab. So just be mindful of that. I'm not saying don't do that. My preference is to identify themes, but if we need to do specifics depending on the situation, then I encourage you to do specifics as well. Does that make sense? Anybody else for this one?
I just say sometimes in that scenario to have some examples in your head, because people will come back and say, well, can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
Yep, have some running examples that you have easy access to, which you probably should if you're to the point of wanting to have a conversation, right? So scenario number 2, You are a manager and your director is a very authoritative and because I said so way of handling business. Oh yeah. You tend to receive limited information and very unclear direction. This personality has been written off as that's just how they are. Everybody love that phrase. It's just they are. Oh, I got it, okay. As a manager, you understand the stress and pressure and are happy to go on with your work. However, your direct reports and their staff find this type of leadership style to be demeaning and hard to work with. What do you do? Thank you. So essentially, this adds a layer to the pot, because if somebody in this situation, your people are going to probably come to you before they're going to go to their director, theoretically, right? So that allows the burden to be placed on you, which chain of command, that makes sense. You know, that makes the most sense. That's appropriate. So how do you handle that? What do you do? If you know that your boss is directly impacting your employees based on how they're interacting. Yes.
I know for me, like this kind of situation, it would be easier and I would prefer to advocate on behalf of my staff than like myself in
Okay.
a situation. So to me, I would think it should be my burden and that is my thing to deal with. And so probably would touch base with the staff and just kind of see, like you had mentioned earlier, if there's themes, see if there's a couple themes or things that stick out to them. And then eventually I would set up a meeting with the director and just kind of say, hey, just kind of talk through some things, get a better understanding of what's going on, and then this is what I've perceived and heard is going on. Like, can we kind of meet in the middle somewhere, like what's going on, essentially? Because I also wouldn't want to assume that the way that they're being portrayed is 100% accurate either. I think that there's truth on both sides.
Sure.
And so then I would kind of say, okay, like in order for us to make this a work-friendly kind of environment, what can we do to better understand each other? And maybe in that role, I could play a little bit more of the mediator than essentially saying, well, they said this or they said that, because I don't know that that would go anywhere.
And as the recipient of that, that doesn't feel good.
Right.
Right? But there does need to be something that occurs. So is that the approach that most feel like they would have in this type of in this type of a situation, scenario? Anybody do anything different?
I don't think I would start there. I think that would be if I tried other things that hadn't worked. I think in this case, if I was the manager, I would make sure that I really understood where my director was coming from, understood their vision, their approach, and then make myself the best interpreter that I could to my staff. So that I'm a protective layer. I can take the maybe negative direct way it's said, reframe that to my staff, convey the same vision, but reframe that in a way that they can handle and work with in a better way. If that didn't work, then I would go to my director.
Okay.
I think it's also important to let them know that you hear their concerns or what they're feeling, but not to engage in like, yeah, I totally understand, like they do this and this, and I don't agree with that, but just be like a listening, like a person who listens to them and not like engage in like banter back and forth about.
So you're validating their feelings,
Right.
not their truth, but you're
Right.
validating their feelings.
Just like I hear you.
Okay.
And I think undermining, in that case, like undermining the director puts you in a really like sticky situation for like a lot of future interactions, especially being that like middle person. Like if you start to kind of like side with the staff, usually I think it's because as a supervisor you're operating out of an emotional place and probably you are bringing your own baggage and
Absolutely.
frustrations into the conversation and aren't able to like weed those out and be like that positive person that tries to be like, yeah, that mediator.
And as supervisors, I feel like you get put into that tricky spot because you can probably see both sides of the coin, right? With an understanding of like the administrative piece, but as well as your direct people. So yeah, so I think there's a fine line. And folks understand that when we're talking about scenarios, there isn't an exact best approach, right? But the best practice is, in all situations, if something is bothering you, or if something is brought to you, It's always better to address it versus ignore it. It's just like with anything else in life. You are well within your rights